July 1518. The streets of Strasbourg moved to a rhythm no one could hear. It began with one woman, dancing alone under the summer sun. Hours turned to days, and she never stopped. Then others joined her, dozens, then hundreds, twisting, trembling, collapsing, yet unable to stop. No one knew what had taken hold of them, or why death had joined the crowd. Welcome to Mind Cipher, where history hides its darkest mysteries. Today, we uncovered the mystery that turned an ordinary city into a nightmare. The true story of the dancing plague of 1518. It began in the heat, July 1518. Strasbourg, a city hemmed in by the Rhine and the Vosges Mountains, baked beneath a summer that refused to end. The air was thick, the river low, and hunger walked the streets long before madness did. Most people blamed the weather, or God, or both. Crops had failed the previous year. Taxes had risen again. Disease still whispered through alleys from an earlier outbreak of smallpox. It was a city stretched thin, trembling between prayer and despair. And then one woman stepped out of her home and started to dance. Her name was Frau Trophia, housewife, a nobody in the records of history until that morning when she left her narrow doorway, crossed to the middle of the street, and began to move. Her husband shouted for her to come inside. She didn't. Her feet tapped against the stones with a rhythm that made no sense. Fast, then slow, desperate, mechanical. At first, the neighbors laughed. A hot day, a silly impulse, maybe too much wine at breakfast. But laughter turned to silence when she kept going. The sun slid down, and the shadows grew long, and still she danced. By nightfall, her clothes clung to her like wet parchment. Her body shook. Her lips bled where she'd bitten them, yet her arms and legs refused to stop. When exhaustion finally took her, she slept only a few hours before beginning again. Word spread fast through the quarter. By the second day, a crowd had gathered: merchants, bakers, curious children, even a few clerics watching in disbelief as Frau Trophia twirled in agony. She seemed to hear music no one else could. On the third day, the first imitator appeared, a man who claimed he felt the rhythm in his blood. Then another. Then two women who said their legs burned if they tried to stay still. Within a week, dozens were moving in the same uncontrollable frenzy. The city council met in alarm. Strasbourg's physicians were summoned, men in long robes carrying theories instead of cures. One declared it was an excess of hot blood, the body's humors boiled by heat and stress. Another, bled celestial influences. None could explain why the dancers couldn't stop. The clergy offered a simpler answer. Punishment. The citizens had angered the saints, particularly Saint Vitus, protector of dancers and musicians, but also their punisher when slighted. The people had sinned, and now they danced under a curse. Meanwhile, the streets filled with music, actual music, ordered by the authorities. If dancing was the disease, maybe more dancing was the cure. So they opened the guild halls, hired drummers and pipers, and told the afflicted to dance it out under supervision. It was the worst decision they could have made. The sound of drums and flutes turned the city into a nightmare carnival. Day and night, the afflicted spun and staggered, their feet raw and bleeding, their faces locked in grimaces that weren't joy or grief, but something far beyond either. The onlookers began to whisper that the dancers were not human anymore, that they were puppets, bodies, hijacked by unseen hands. Mothers left their homes to find missing sons among the moving bodies. Husbands tried to hold down their wives, only to feel their own legs tremble with the urge to join. Children imitated the dancers until they couldn't stop either. The heat thickened. The stench of sweat and blood filled the air. Some collapsed from exhaustion, only to wake hours later thrashing again. Others never woke at all. Their hearts simply stopped mid-step. By late July, 400 people were said to be dancing. The city's food stores emptied, as families neglected markets and mills. Priests warned of apocalypse. Merchants fled. The Rhine ferries refused passengers from Strasbourg, afraid the curse might spread. Doctors tried bleeding the dancers, purging them, even locking them in cellars. Nothing worked. Every morning brought new victims. A chronicler wrote that it looked as if the devil himself played the fiddle, and Strasbourg answered with its feet. Then came the rain. For 3 night storms hammered the city, washing filth down the gutters. But when the clouds cleared, the dancers were still there, mud, street, skeletal, moving as if the rain had baptized them into a darker faith. Desperation turned to superstition. Families hung crucifixes at every window, burned herbs, whispered prayers to Saint Vitus, and to any other spirit that might listen. But the dance continued, relentless, merciless. The council finally banned all music. Instruments were seized. Public dancing was outlawed. But it was too late. The rhythm was no longer coming from flutes or drums. It lived inside the people now. No one could say how many had died, dozens, perhaps more. Some said you could hear the screams at night long after the bodies were taken away, as if the stones themselves remembered the steps. Then, in the first week of August, something even stranger happened. Witnesses claimed to see figures among the dancers who weren't from the city, faces unfamiliar, eyes hollow, moving with impossible grace. When approached, they vanished into the crowd. The rumors spread faster than the plague itself. Some said the dead had joined the living. Others swore angels of punishment were dancing among them. By mid-August, the council had only one option left: send the afflicted to the shrine of Saint Vitus in the mountains, where monks could pray the curse away. Wagons were prepared, but before they could leave, the dancing reached the cathedral square, hundreds of bodies moving as one, a single heartbeat echoing through the stones. The bells began to ring, not for celebration, but for warning. The air felt heavier, charged, as if something vast and unseen was watching. And in that moment right before the council's plan could be carried out, the dancing changed. Some said the ground itself began to tremble. No one knew whether it was thunder, madness, or something far older awakening beneath Strasbourg's streets. All they knew was that the music was back, and this time, it wasn't coming from any human hand. The bells of Strasbourg rang through the night, echoing over the rooftops like warnings from another world. By dawn, the city had stopped pretending this was an illness. It was something else. Something beyond medicine or prayer. The square was littered with the unmoving. Those who had danced themselves past the point of exhaustion lay where they had fallen, arms twisted, mouths open as if gasping for music that had finally stopped. Others still moved, slowly now, as if pulled by invisible strings. No one dared go near them. The council, desperate to end the madness, sent word to the priests of the Saint Vitus Shrine, small chapel nestled deep in the hills near Saverne. If this was a curse, they said, then only the saint himself could break it. The journey began at dawn. Dozens of wagons creaked through the city gates, carrying the dancers half-conscious, bloodied, their feet bound in linen to hide the raw flesh beneath. Guards marched beside them, heads down, unwilling to look into their eyes. Some of the afflicted sang as they traveled, wordless hums that rose and fell with the wheels. Others whispered fragments of prayers. One woman was said to have laughed for an hour straight before collapsing into silence. When they reached the shrine, the monks met them with holy water and hymns. Each dancer was led to the altar, where relics of Saint Vitus rested, a small statue, blackened with age. The monks prayed, anointed team, and tied red shoes to their feet, a symbol of devotion and healing. And then, for the first time in weeks, the dancing stopped. It didn't end in screams or collapse, just stillness, as if the curse, having consumed everything it wanted, finally let go. The survivors slept for days. When they woke, most couldn't remember what had happened. Some claimed they'd seen bright lights and heard music too beautiful for human ears. Others swore they'd felt hands guiding their movements, pushing them beyond exhaustion towards something they couldn't describe. Biking Strasbourg life tried to return to normal. The markets reopened, the bells tolled for the dead, and the council ordered all records of the dance madness sealed. But fear lingered. People avoided the square where Frau Trofia had first moved. At night, some said they could still hear faint footsteps echoing through the cobblestones, as if the city itself hadn't stopped dancing. Centuries later, historians would search for answers. Some blamed Ergot, poisoning a fungus that grows on damp rye and causes hallucinations, spasms, and hysteria. But Ergot fades quickly in heat, and that summer had been mercilessly hot. The theory didn't hold. Others spoke of mass psychogenic illness, a contagious hysteria born of fear, famine, and despair. In a world ruled by superstition, the mind could make the body obey its darkest beliefs. The dancers weren't sick, they were trapped in a shared delusion, their brains hijacked by faith and panic. But even that explanation fails to capture what witnesses described: the rhythm, the unity, the sense of something moving through them rather than within them. There were stranger ideas too. Some said the city stood on cursed ground, the site of an older pagan ritual that had once summoned spirits of frenzy and harvest. Others believed Saint Vitus himself demanded the dance as penance for forgotten sins. And then there were the whispers barely recorded, half-remembered, that a figure had been seen near Frau Trofia's home the night before she began. A man in dark clothes, carrying a fiddle no one had seen before or since. Some swore they heard him playing through the heat haze, a tune that wormed its way into the bones. The records never mention him again. By autumn, the city returned to uneasy peace. But the memory of that summer lingered, a scar across history. Families changed their names. Merchants refused to speak of it. The council forbade dancing for decades, fearing the curse might return if anyone so much as tapped their foot in the wrong rhythm. Still, the story spread through Germany, France, and beyond. Other towns would later experience smaller outbreaks of dancing mania, but none would match the horror of Strasbourg. It remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. An event witnessed by hundreds, recorded by priests, doctors, and scholars, and yet still impossible to explain. Because no matter how rational the theories sound, none of them account for the feeling described by those who survived. They all said the same thing, that when the music took them, they felt free for the first time in their lives. That the pain, the hunger, the fear, everything's appeared. That something vast and unseen moved through them, commanding them to dance. And when it was over, when they woke and found the streets empty and their bodies broken, one truth remained. They hadn't been dancing alone. Something else had been there watching, listening, waiting for the right rhythm to return. Even now, in Strasbourg's old quarter, locals still tell the story. They say that on summer nights, when the air turns heavy and the bells fall silent, you can hear faint footsteps echoing between the walls. A slow, steady beat, like someone beginning to dance.